Yo, SWAC talk. Light on the mic, it's a play. See Wells the guy taking us state to state. Catch us Wednesday, Sunday, stats on the buffet. From gridiron to the court, we got the say. Football spirals, hoop dreams in the chat. Chopping it up, deep dives on every stat. Texas to Florida, repping border to border. Arkansas to Bama, the vibe getting warmer. SWAC talk, keep the knowledge on deck. See Wells spinning, wisdom gotta show respect. Facts flying higher than a wide receiver's check. From football to hoops, what y'all expect? Guests roll through, dropping stories untold. Legends from the SWAC, spitting straight gold. Locker room vibe, secrets unfold. CW heavy like a championship hold. The South's got a rhythm, a culture to match. Each stat, each fact, another door latch. SWAC talk connects like a perfect pass catch. From Alabama skies to Florida's grass patch. SWAC talk, keep the energy alive. Wednesday to Sunday, where the legends thrive. Facts and stats sharper than a coach's knife. Ballin' on the mic, that's how we survive.
All right, everybody, what is going on? How y'all doing? Welcome to today's edition of SWAC Talk, the show we cover the SWAC inside and out. Of course, I am your tour guide around the SWAC, C. Wells, coming at you. And today we are going to continue our series of returning, top returning players in the SWAC. And today we are focusing on the defensive line, and I'm going to put an asterisk by this show. And I'm going to put an asterisk by the rest of this series. And that asterisk basically means these guys may be gone by the time this video comes out. These guys may be gone next week. These guys may have already been gone. We don't know. But we're working off of, I'm using a lot of these guys' social media and things like that. So if they haven't put it up there yet, then, hey, what can I say? But there, with the window being open until I think Friday, there's still time for guys to, hop in and try to move on. So this is all just a fun exercise anyway, so nothing scientific. But we're gonna do the best we can with it and have a good time doing it. So with that being said, man, y'all make sure y'all check out those socials. Facebook is SWAC Talk, Twitter SWAC Talk 76, Instagram SWAC Talk. Don't forget to like the video, comment, and share your thoughts. Got a couple big shows coming at you this week, so keep it locked here. Coach SWAC Smoke on Thursday. Live 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern, and probably next Sunday we'll do our linebacker, leading and returning linebackers of the coming into the 2025 season. So just keep it locked here, and it's gonna go down like that. So with that being said, man, we're not gonna waste any time. We're gonna go ahead and jump into this. We're gonna go ahead and jump directly into this, and we'll start off with the Bulldogs at Alabama A&M, of course, and their top guy returning, thanks to the fact that they have a spring roster, is Jamarion Ellis. He's a redshirt sophomore, played in 9 games, recorded 34 tackles, 8 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, and 5 quarterback hurries. So those are really solid numbers there. Again, this is one of those teams that's bringing in a new coaching staff, and so there's a lot of things that's gonna be open, and there's gonna be a lot of emphasis on a new system, and this is a defense that lost, as a whole, they lost some of the top tacklers. So there's opportunities there for guys to make plays. There's some good opportunities for guys to take hold and make some things happen. And Ellis is a guy who, has a good chance at doing that. I thought he played a solid, he had some solid numbers this past season. And I would not be surprised to see him take more steps as he develops. He's still a young guy. So, he has the opportunity to develop. And this, coach that does like defense. So, it's a coach that came with a running offense and a physical defense. So that plays into a strong defensive line, and I would expect to see that happen. And this unit as a whole registered 21 sacks last season, which put them 7th. They did finish 2nd in the league in forced fumbles at 13. and so that's a solid number. And they were fourth in fumble recoveries with 9. So they did a good job of making some things happen there. Just overall looking at their numbers, they were sixth in rushing defense at 148 yards per game, and they were 11th in passing defense at 219 yards per game. So those are some numbers that can be improved, and a lot of that will happen, with a new head coach and a new philosophy. Coach Maynard, his team was more offensive minded. I think this team will be more balanced and have a more focus on defense. And so Ellis is a guy that can help lead that charge. Next up is Bama State, and this is a defense that lost some key guys, man. When you look at that defensive line, you lose Traquan Thomas, who could have easily been defensive player of the year, or at least co-defensive player of the year. That's a guy who finished the season with 14 tackles for loss. Also led the conference with 11 sacks. Led the conference with 12 total sacks. So that's a guy who was a huge piece of a defense, Legacy Bowl MVP, and that's a guy who really was a game changer. And so, when you go down the list, they lost a few other guys. They lost Stephon Young Roll as well, and a couple other guys off the D line, and that leads us to Terrell Lightfoot Jr. He is a redshirt junior. He had 18 tackles on the season, 2.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, and 2 quarterback hurries. New defensive coordinator at Bama State. I'm expecting there to still be that defensive focus for this team. I don't expect that to be a huge change. Maybe they won't be as dominant, but it's always possible. That defensive mindset is huge for Bama State. This was a defense that finished second in passing defense at 159 yards per game. They led the league in rushing defense at 106 yards per game, and that all just equals physicality and strong line play. They finished first in the league in sacks registered by their defense with 39. They forced 16 fumbles when they led the conference, and they recovered uh, 10 of those, which was third in the conference. Meanwhile, they also led the league in interceptions with 17. So this obviously was a very, 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 very good defense. And that's gonna be something that we keep an out on if they can continue to keep that mentality and that production. Um, and so, filling in some huge holes on the D line is going to be a key. If they can kind of make that happen, then I think this will be a team who comes out on the positive end of things. Um, but right now, like I said, we just taking it second by second, and we won't really know exactly where we stand until we get to the season with this team. And of course, that statement can go for pretty much everybody. Um, because we just don't know with a lot of teams right now. But that there is, when you look at the list, there are some very solid guys returning, some guys who are stars or who could be potential stars, or there's some all conference guys returning on this list as well. So, there's a lot to kind of hang your hat on the defensive line as a whole. Um, we just have to kind of keep tabs on some of these other guys and see if they develop any further, um, if they can continue to develop. But right now, I think the future is bright for a lot of groups, and I think that really helps these units. Um, and when you look at, again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but you look at a guy like Traquan Thomas. He had like 3 or 4 games in conference play in the season where he was a top guy individually in sacks uh, in a game. He led the conference with 3 sacks in one game, tied with Malachi Bailey from Alcorn. So that's a big hole to fill. I mean, you don't want to keep beating that horse, but that's a big hole to fill. And I think they're going to do it more with numbers. But, it's always an opportunity for guys to kind of step in there and make some things happen. Moving on, next is Alcorn, and they lose Malachi Bailey, who was one of the best defensive ends in the conference. He had a season high 4 tackles for loss, and he also tied for a conference high with 3 sacks in a game. Uh, and they return Gideon Spottsville. Um, what did I do? He comes in with 11 games of action, 32 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and a half a sack. Like again, there's big holes to fill on this team. And you're looking at a defense that wasn't necessarily as great as a lot of Alcorn defenses were. They finished sixth in the league in sacks, registered with 24. They were fourth in fumbles forced at 11. They finished sixth in interceptions with 11, and they recovered 12. They recovered. Let's see, they forced. You say they forced 11 fumbles, but they recovered 12. That don't make sense. But they led the league. I guess they led the league in fumble recoveries. So they did a good job of forcing turnovers. This was a team that finished eighth in the league in rushing defense with 175 yards per game, which is not necessarily Alcorn like. And they were fourth in passing defense at 172 yards per game. So this was, a defense that was, they were in the mix, kind of like they were fourth in total defense, so not bad. They weren't what they usually are, but they were still solid. And so, I think they're bringing in some new pieces on that defensive line, and looking for guys to be, you know, big time pass rushers and run stoppers on that defensive line. So again, there's a big hole to fill on this defense, and I expect it to kind of be filled with numbers more than anything else. And that takes us to Bethune-Cookman, and this is one of those teams I'm gonna put an asterisk on this team for every guy that I talk about throughout the series, because every time I do a video, a guy from Bethune-Cookman seems to leave, and I'm not sure. I checked, and I think this guy's still here, but he may be gone. If not, he may be gone later. But that's Adrian Hall. He is a senior. He had 12 games of action, registered 51 tackles, 4.5 tackles for loss, and a half a sack. Had 3 quarterback hurries and a fumble recovery. And those are very, very solid numbers there. This was a defense that was not that good. I mean, to be honest with you, they struggled a lot this season, um, especially at the line of scrimmage. But he was a guy who really kind of stepped in there and made some things happen. To a degree for a defense, like I said, that really had their struggles. Um, this defense was 11th in total defense at 459 yards per game. They finished 11th in rushing defense at 237 yards per game, and they were eighth in passing defense at 217 yards per game. Now, this team led the league in sacks for a long time during the season. If not leading the league during the season, they were like top 2 in sacks. They actually finished 4th in the league in sacks with 25. And for a defense that really, struggled to stop teams, that's boom or bust. They either got back there and made a play, or they got back, or they didn't get back there and gave up big yardage. They forced 5 fumbles on the season, which was 11th. They had 10 interceptions, which was 7th, and they recovered 3 fumbles, which was 12th. So they, obviously didn't have a lot of takeaways this past season, finishing with 13 takeaways on the season. So when you can't take the ball away, you can't stop people, and you can't get out the field on third downs, you're really going to have a tough time of it. And giving up 44% on third downs is very detrimental to winning, and it also leads to a team that gives up 34 points a game. But Adrian Hall was a solid member of that unit. Again, not a lot of guys made a lot of plays there, but they were competitive, especially later in the season. They kind of put some things together, but still wasn't enough to get over the hump. And if this guy is still here, I think he can be a top guy on that unit and definitely help them as they try to develop some more toughness on that line of scrimmage, and just being overall a tougher defense to get past. Next up is FAMU, and they returned quite a few guys on the D line, led by James Ash, who played in 12 games, had 44 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks, and 2 quarterback hurries. Um, they are still looking to add, maybe add one more piece on the D line as a pass rusher, but they do, James Ash really was a solid guy on this defense. Now, this defense was not necessarily where they were in previous years. They had their struggles, especially against the run for a large chunk of the season, finishing seventh in rushing defense at 167 yards per game. They finished the league sixth in passing defense at 182 yards per game, and total defense they finished at fifth at 349 yards per game, registering 21 sacks, which was ninth. Again, that's a number that's way down from typical the last few years for FAMU, where they were a top 2 or 3 team in sacks as a defense. They also only forced 2 fumbles this past season, and they recovered 4, which I'm assuming that counts special teams. But they only forced 2 fumbles on the season, and they only had 9 interceptions on the season, which basically gives them 13 takeaways, just like Bethune. Uh, Very undark cloud like of this defense, but James Ash was a guy who did make some plays on that defensive line. He also finished the season as a second team All Conference defensive lineman. He's the first guy on this list that returns as an All Conference guy, and could be a first team guy coming into the preseason. As there are some big name guys who are moving on. And I expect FAMU to be tougher defensively this season. I think, they have a new defense coordinator. I think Coach Cozy also is more hands-on this season. So I expect them to do, to do a better job being more stout in the pass game and the run game. And that, that really should help them out a lot. Next up is Grambling, and Grambling returns Bryce Cage, who played in 12 games. He's a redshirt senior. He had 49 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 4 sacks, 5 quarterback hurries, and 1 forced fumble. With the loss of Andrew Jones on his defense, I think that puts him solidly as the top defender on his defense, and should be a preseason All Conference candidate. Um, Surprisingly, he did not make first. He did not make All Conference. I expect him to make All Conference in the preseason at minimum. Grambling defensively, like I said, they were a team that feasted off of turnovers. They had 10 forced fumbles. They recovered 11. They had 15 interceptions as well, so basically 26 takeaways, and that really helped them a lot. This defense also had 25 sacks on the season. They were solid against the run at 146 yards per game. They struggled against the pass, finishing last with 230 yards per game. They gave up 15 touchdowns to go with those 15 interceptions. And total defense, they finished ninth at 377 yards. So, with the offense struggling the way that it did, it really put a lot more pressure on their defense. And I think this is like I said, you're losing your top tackler on the season, a guy who was everywhere on this defensive unit, a guy who actually led the conference in tackles. So you're losing some big production there, and so that leaves some opportunities for guys to step in and make some things happen. And I thought Bryce Cage was a solid guy there, and I expect him to be even better moving forward. And next up is Jackson State, being led by Jeremiah Williams, who was the defensive player of the year defensive player of the game in the Celebration Bowl. Should have been All Conference. It's kind of, he had a really good season. In 13 games, he had 58 tackles, 79 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, 4 quarterback hurries. Definitely could have been a guy to make All Conference. I think it'd be a robbery if he didn't make preseason at minimum this season. Looking at the list of guys returning. He could easily be a first team all conference guy. Um, and definitely a game changer. And like I said, he had a big celebration bowl, so you kind of expect that from him. Jackson State defensively is loaded. Again, they finished second in rush. They finished second in rushing defense, allowing 110 yards per game. They were second in total defense at 273 yards per game. They were third in passing defense at 162 yards per game. They finished the season second in sacks with 37. They forced 9 fumbles on the season, which was eight. They recovered eight, which is six, and they finished the league finished with 15 interceptions, which was second. And when you have a group of guys that can get to the quarterback, and you have a defense that can stop the run as a whole, I think that makes for a very solid unit. Again, they're the front runners in the conference, so I don't expect that to change. And like I said, I think Williams will be one of the top guys in the conference, definitely a preseason all conference candidate, um, along with, in my eyes, along with Cage, Ash, and Hall, and maybe even you throw Ellis in there, and of course, Givens from Southern, and maybe Massey or Marshall from PV or TSU. But I think these guys are probably going to be your guys that make the preseason all conferences. If they're there. But Jeremiah Williams definitely should be on that list and be one of the top guys coming back um, on the defensive line. He actually has the second most tackles on this list of returning guys. So he's very productive, and I expect, I don't expect anything different from him in the next season. Next up is Valley, and there's a reason why I don't have a picture for anybody on Valley, because you had to go deep down on the statistical charts to find a guy who returned from Valley. They lost a lot of guys to the portal. They lost a lot of guys that finishing their eligibility. Also, they have a new head coach, so a lot of this is kind of up in the air anyway. But when I looked it up, Tyson Pirtle, he's a redshirt sophomore. He played 7 games, had 15 tackles, 2 tackles for loss on the season. So not, again, there's not a lot there returning production wise. And this was a defense that really had a rough go of it. They finished the season with 14 sacks, which was 11th in the league. They finished the season forcing 8 fumbles, which is ninth in the league. They recovered 9 fumbles, which was fifth in the league, and they finished the season with 5 interceptions, which was last in the league. They finished 10th in passing defense at 218 yards per game, and they finished last in rushing defense at 238 yards per game, giving up 5.9 yards per carry, and they finished last in total defense, allowing 7 yards per play and 457 yards per game. So how much of an effect losing the guys that they lost will have on the defense. That's debatable, but they did lose some solid players there. Um, and that it's tough when you lose guys that are that, even if they're not, even if the unit as a whole is not the greatest, they did have some guys who made some solid plays for them. And when you lose that, like a guy like Dante Reed or Donovan Parham, you lose those guys. That really changes a lot on your defense. So, and Parham finished eighth in the league with point 0.4 sacks per game, had 5 total. You losing those kind of guys, those are numbers that, you don't really have coming back. You losing 9 total sacks between Reed and Parham. So, that kind of hurts. And so, trying to find, there's going to be a lot of new faces on this defense. And there's going to be, a lot of opportunities for guys to come in. I know Coach Buckley is probably, combing the woods, trying to find whatever he can find, especially this first year, to kind of, stop the bleeding. And we're just gonna see how this team shapes up. Right now, they don't return a lot of production on defense, so it's gonna be tough. And like I said, last season defense wasn't great, so it's only up from here for the Delta Devils. Next up is Prairie View Panthers. They return Jamal Marshall, finished with 12 games of action, 32 tackles, two tackles for loss, one sack, five quarterback hurries, and one forced fumble, one fumble recovery. Excuse me. Again, this is a new coach coming in, Coach Jackson. Obviously, they definitely gonna be more defensively focused, and so they're bringing in a lot of talent in the portal. So there's gonna be a lot of room for guys to slide in. But a guy coming back with some production is definitely gonna help. This defense was kind of middle of the pack defense, allowed 27 points per game, which was sixth in the league. Allowed 364 yards per game, which was seventh in the league. They finished third in rushing defense at 146 yards per game. They finished ninth in passing defense at 218 yards per game. Gave up 28 touchdowns, which were the most in the excuse me. They gave up 17 touchdowns on the season, which was the fourth most in the conference. Finished the season with 18 sacks, which was 10th. They forced uh, 10 fumbles, which was seventh. They finished with 11 interceptions, which was fifth, and they recovered five fumbles, which was 10th. So, this defense was kind of a middle of the pack defense, and I know they are addressing all of that with the moves they're making. So we'll see. We'll see how this team shapes up. But they do have some solid pieces returning. They lost some big pieces as well. So it's kind of a net zero, and we'll see how they move forward from here. Next up is Southern, and Southern obviously returns Kelby Givens. Knock on wood. Um, this guy was the SWAC Defensive Player of the Year, first team All Conference, um, preseason Defensive Player of the Year, and I expect barring anything crazy, for him to have those same accolades coming into the season. He is the leading return. He's the returning leader in all categories on his defensive line group. Finished with 73 tackles, 27 tackles for loss, 12 sacks, 13 quarterback hurries, and three forced fumbles. Uh, Again, this is a guy who was a game changer, a game wrecker. It took him a little bit during the season to kind of get going because teams were double teaming him until Darius Harris stepped up on the other side. It's going to be interesting to see who steps into that defensive end role on that opposite side this season because they're going to get that attention again. Um, and Southern lost some key guys off of this defense, and it's going to be important for somebody to alleviate that pressure on him. But he is the top defensive lineman returning in the conference. Could possibly be obviously as defensive player of the year. Is the top guy on defense returning, and so he is a guy who can he can make a lot of plays. He can change games. He can turn over a lot of situations. He can make a lot of things hard for teams. Um, he had two sacks against Bethune-Cookman this past season. He had two sacks against Prairie View. He had two sacks against Alcorn. He had two sacks against Grambling. So he was definitely very disruptive there. He finished with 5.5 tackles for loss, which was a conference high against Prairie View. He had 3.5 tackles for loss against Bethune-Cookman. He also had three tackles for loss against Pine Bluff, 2.5 tackles for loss against Nichols, 2.5 against Alcorn. So as you can see, the guy was very disruptive all year long, and that definitely um, should not change. Although, like I say, I think he will demand a lot of attention, and so you're gonna see teams kind of make adjustments and try to double team him and make things a little bit tougher for him. But right now, he is the top guy coming back in the conference, so definitely a first team all conference guy in the preseason, and we'll see how he does moving forward. Southern defensively as a whole led the conference in passing defense, allowing 152 yards per game. They only allowed 12 touchdowns. They did only have 7 interceptions as a defense. Um, Finished the season third in sacks with 35. They forced 10 fumbles, which was sixth in the league. They recovered 8. So they finished the season with 15 takeaways. Like I said, they were fifth in rushing defense at 148 yards per game, and they finished third in total defense at 300 yards per game, and third in scoring defense at 23 yards per game. So, this is a defense that losing some guys, especially in the middle of the defense and linebacker and in the secondary. They taking some big losses, but they do return some guys that saw some extensive action, and they bringing in a lot of pieces to kind of fill in the gaps. But having a guy like that as your anchor, um, definitely makes the defense a lot better. It's better to have a guy like that than to not have a guy like that. And so, that really is a game changer for them. Next up is Texas Southern, and they lost some top guys as well. But Sincere Massey, he's a junior. He has 11 games of action, 43 tackles, 1.5 tackle for loss. This is a guy I can see being a second team all conference guy in the preseason. I think he's going to get some more action as the season goes on. This defense was kind of up and down. They allowed 29.2 points per game. Which was eighth in the league. They were they were sixth in total defense at 353 yards per game. They were at ninth in rushing defense at 175 yards per game. They finished fifth in passing defense at 178 yards per game. Finished the season with 21 sacks, which was eighth. They forced 11 fumbles, which was third. They also finished the season with 10 interceptions, which was eighth. And they recovered 8 fumbles, which was eighth as well. So, this was a middle of the pack defense, but this was a team that kind of came on strong toward the end of the season, picked up a couple big wins to close out the season, and finished in third place. So, with a team that wants to run the ball as much as they do, you're obviously going to have to be tougher defensively because, that's just a more physical style of ball you want to play on both sides. So I expect them to, continue to develop and get better. And closing out our list again is another team with a logo because I couldn't find a picture for this guy, but Kayvon Majors is a senior from Pine Bluff, finished with 32 tackles in 11 games, 2 tackles for loss, one fumble recovery. This was a defense that was ravaged by the portal. You had to go pretty far down the list to find a returning guy on the defensive line, and like I said, this team has been ravaged by the portal almost every year, and it's just like a cycle. They get guys and they lose a lot of guys. So they're constantly just cycling guys in and out, and it's not really doing a lot because they aren't very stout on the defensive line. They finished the season last year with 7 sacks, which was last in the league. They forced 5 fumbles, which was 10th in the league. Um, they finished with 11 interceptions, which was 4th in the league, and they recovered 7 fumbles, which was 9th in the league. Their passing defense was 7th at 208 yards per game, 16 touchdowns, 11 interceptions. Their rushing defense was 10th. They allowed 218 yards per game. Again, that's that struggle on the line of scrimmage. They're really having a tough time there, allowing 5.3 yards per carry, which was the third highest total defense. They were 10th at 426 yards per game, allowing 6.3 yards per play, and they gave up 35.8 points per game. So this defense really had a tough time, and when you're constantly turning over guys and you can't really build depth, and you're losing so many guys that you're playing other positions. You're moving guys from other positions to play those positions. You're not going to have a lot of production, and so it's almost like when you're in that kind of position and you lose guys. You're replacing those guys is not really a huge deal because there's not a lot there to replace. So Coach Hampton's coming into his third year, and this is their cycle. They've done it all 3 years, and so we just had to see if they can get better at all. But right now, in terms of returning production, there's not much there. So with that being said, man, I'm your tour guide around the SWAC Seawell. I'm signing out, man. I will catch y'all on the rebound again. Asterisk on this video, asterisk on the next video, asterisk on the previous videos. because we just don't know who's gonna be there and who's not. So again, just a fun little exercise, and we'll catch y'all on the rebound. Peace.